Hi, Kevin Wright back here again with another weekly property finance tip. What's it about this week? B&Bs, or guest houses, or even small boutique hotels. Now, if you're interested in buying those, not necessary to continue running them as they are, but probably as serviced accommodation, keep watching because I'm going to tell you why they're almost impossible to mortgage. So, you're into serviced accommodation or want to get into it, and you've identified that a great opportunity is going to be a existing bed and breakfast, guest house, or small boutique hotel. And, there's thousands, probably tens of thousands of them all over the UK. Now, if they're trading, then you're going to find that it's almost impossible to actually get a mortgage on them. And I'm going to explain to you why that is. And of course, what the solution is, because there's no point telling you a problem unless I give you a solution. These little owner-occupied B&Bs are pretty formulaic. In fact, I could probably give you an avatar of what a bed and breakfast or guest house owner looks like. And this would be true invariably in many cases. So, typically it would be a couple, and they would have probably had the B&B and run it as a lifestyle business for the last 10 or 20 years. It probably wasn't their first career, it was their second career. So they probably got into it in their 40s and 50s, and they're now in their 60s, 70s, sometimes even 80s. And now they've had enough and they've decided it's the time to retire. So they want to sell their business. So that's typically the situation. Now, let's drill down a bit and see what makes this so difficult to mortgage. Now, they're probably not clued up and probably certainly haven't done any serviced accommodation training course. So they're probably less clued up about Airbnb and Booking.com and the other sort of channels now that serviced accommodation users are into. So they're probably, focused on a website, and probably it's a bit of a naff website in many cases that someone knocked up for them on the cheap a few years ago, and probably the tourist board as well. So they still rely on tourist board. So their marketing is pretty much from, a different age, which means their occupancy probably isn't that great. Now, some may be fuller than others, of course, and of course there could be seasonal variations. So, now, here's where we drill down into the detail. Their lifestyle is to have a decent amount of money to spend and not to pay too much tax, if any at all. So, their business strategy over the last 10 or 20 years has been to encourage their guests to pay cash as much as possible. If not for the stay, then for the incidentals. So if they have a bar, an evening bar, or they provide evening meals, they would encourage those to be paid in cash. Now, what's the attraction in that? Unsurprisingly, it goes straight in their back pocket, which means they don't declare it. And it's not unheard of for them when you're doing the viewing, if you're sensible, you'll ask for the last 3 years' accounts, because that's one of the ways that you evaluate a business, certainly this type of small business. And they'd be saying to you, look, the accounts, it shows 30,000 in there, but it's really 60,000. That's great, except that no bank's going to be interested in what you don't declare on the books. And you'd think that even if they've structured that business for years, so they've banked it, they've sort of pocketed as much cash as they can, the other side of this actually is their accountant with with the amount they do put through the books, then maximises their expenditure, because it's what accountants tend to do. That's how they justify their role. So their profit shrinks down and down and down, often to the point where they either pay no tax because their profit is sucked up in their personal allowance for income tax, or it's a little bit over that and they pay minimal tax. So when you see these books, you see that typically turnover's not great and the profit is even worse. Now, here's where the problem is. When you take those 3 years accounts to your bank and say, can I have a commercial mortgage on that? The likelihood is they're going to say the business can't afford it. Now, you may have all sorts of great plans, but unless you've got a really strong service accommodation trading history, banks are not particularly interested in running with what might be, is they want to see historical information. So, and here's where existing B&B owners and the like miss a trick, because you'd think that if they'd made a decision to retire, it wasn't an overnight thing. They planned it, 2, 3, 4, 5 years before even. You'd think they'd be savvy enough, or their accountant would be savvy enough to tell them, hey, you've got to get this business ready for sale. So you need to be beefing up your profits so that would-be buyers can get a mortgage on it. So stop pocketing the cash, put it all through the business, beef up the profits. I'll stop knocking your expenses down to the floor, and we'll make sure you've got a good taxable profit. You're going to pay some tax for the last 3 years or more, but you're going to make it easy to sell your business. Does that happen? Hardly ever. That's why it's almost impossible to get a mortgage on, but it's worse than that, because this couple have got this inflated sense of what their property is worth or the business is worth. In actual fact, the business is worth next to nothing based on the poor accounts. So really, these properties tend to hang on the market, and if you've been looking at them, it's not unusual to see they've been marketed for 2, 3, even 4 years, during which time the owners have got less and less motivation to keep the business going, so the turnover is probably diminishing each year in many cases. So here's the situation then, that they tend to hang on the market for a number of years, and as always happens, when a seller doesn't sell their property for a prolonged period, they readjust downwards the price they'll be prepared to accept. And my training, I call it the motivation curve. So these, it started off incredibly high, it gets progressively lower. Usually it ends up being sold to a cash buyer who hits them with a bottomed out price. They're now so depressed about not selling their property and so eager to get on to retirement, they've already wasted 2, 3, 4 years of their retirement already, that they eventually take a knockdown offer, which is probably no more than the vacant possession value. Now, in commercial speak, that means bricks and mortar value. So bricks and mortar in resi, vacant possession value. In other words, the business has no value, it's just the value of the building. They probably had 4 or 5 buyers, all really keen, probably like themselves that they were 10 or 20 years ago, want a second career, lifestyle business. Offers are accepted, but then they drop out because they haven't got the cash and they've found out when they've gone to their commercial bank, can't borrow it either. So, what happens? There is an angle here. Now, and this is how you buy these properties. We use bridging finance because bridging lenders aren't fussed about the business. All they're interested in is the value of the property. So they'll lend on the vacant possession value. How does that benefit you? Well, once you've bought it on bridging, if you work like stink for 12 months to build up the value, use all the things you've learned from whatever course you've gone on, get on all the channels and get that up to the highest occupancy. You probably refurbed it as well. You've probably converted their own living accommodation to extra rooms, so that alone would boost up the income. So after 12 months, you've got a much more substantial, profitable business that we can then take you to a commercial lender and get a commercial mortgage enough to repay the bridging loan. So that's a great way to actually get these properties at a real knockdown price. Now, you're still being fair to the existing owners because you're just letting them get on with their life. You've allowed them to come to a realistic view of the world rather than their previously unrealistic view of what their property's worth. You give them a fair price for actually what is just a building and no real business value. And to some degree, they've shot themselves in the foot by not preparing their business for sale. So, if serviced accommodation is your thing, if buying up old B&Bs, guest houses and boutique hotels is where you want to get into, but you've been frustrated at how you finance them, now you know. So, hopefully that's been useful to you. And if it has, click the subscribe, like, and do place a comment. Always happy to reply to the comments. See you next week.